This is Proxy Countdown. Welcome to the big show for the week of September 23rd, 2024, alongside my tag team partner, Matt Mascardi. I'm Damian Rawls. On today's countdown, Germany's greatest and gentlest glass cliff. A Hollywood director adds director to his title. Elliott Investment Management is still not buying Southwest Airlines' cheesy announcements. ConAgra shareholders prefer action over promises. And on the big vote, yet another American Midwest board of interconnected superstars. That's Procter & Gamble, right?
Procter & Gamble.
Let's get over our trade wire, the top stories. Germany's Commerzbank appoints CFO Bettina Orlopp as the firm's first female CEO in its 154-year history. The announcement came barely 2 weeks after CEO Manfred Knoff said he would be stepping down. Her first task will be to defend Commerzbank against Italian rival UniCredit, who has rapidly built a major stake in the competitor and is threatening a hostile takeover. So this is like a glass cliff war, right? This is fighting a war with a glass sword. I don't know what this is.
It's a glass cliff built on the side of a glass mountain.
Good luck, Bettina Orlopp over at Commerzbank. Terminator director James Cameron joined Stability AI's board of directors. That's Terminator the movie, not the company. And that's Terminator the movie, which explores the potential dangers of AI dominance and rebellion, where robots become self-aware, reject human authority, and determine that the human race needs to be destroyed.
Is that what Stability AI does?
What? Are they pro-human or pro-AI?
I'm not sure which side they are on, yeah.
The board of directors of Marvel Technology has a golden opportunity to get less bro-y. After Ford Tamer's resignation, Tamer steps down with 11% influence, while the board currently is composed of only 3 women with a total of 10% influence. It's data that you can only get at freeflowanalytics.com. Invitation Homes increased the size of the board from 10 to 11 members and appointed Rear Admiral H. Wyman Howard III, retired, as a director. Rear Admiral H. Wyman Howard III at a rental homes company.
They definitely did a skills assessment.
Help me with that one.
That was a skills assessment play.
I don't understand that one. Builders First Source promoted CFO Pete Jackson as the company's new CEO, replacing Dave Rush, who lasted less than 2 years at the job. Pete Beckman is the company's new CFO. So here's the question: how many Petes and Daves does it take to change a light bulb over at Builders First Source? I guess in this case, Matt, it's 2 Petes and 0 Daves, right?
Wow.
Sorry, Dave.
Wow. Dave's out, yeah.
And lastly, Robert Fornaro, the former CEO of Spirit Airlines and AirTran Airlines, is joining the Southwest Airlines board. It's hard to say if this is embattled CEO Bob Jordan playing defense or activist investor Elliott Management playing offense, because Spirit has been struggling for some time. Everyone's trying to buy Spirit, and the now defunct AirTran was acquired by Southwest more than a decade ago. So I don't know whose side this guy is on.
It does seem like airlines only seem to find other failed airlines to put on their boards.
A lot of failed airlines.
That's true.
Let's stick with Southwest and move over to our proxy cage matches. Activist investor Elliott Investment has escalated its boardroom battle with Southwest Airlines, saying it plans to request a special shareholder meeting this week to overhaul the airline's leadership. So the hedge fund owns more than 10% of Southwest stock, enough for it to call a special meeting, and has already laid out plans to replace 2/3 of the board's 15 directors. So that's 10 directors. They've already 6 have resigned, with 4 new members slated to join in November. Southwest, however, once again ruled out any leadership change, saying CEO Bob Jordan was the right leader. That's the quote. He's the right leader. Is that enough for shareholders?
without the train crash, it does smell Norfolk Southern-y, doesn't it?
He's the right leader, though.
You have the right leader, the right person in charge. You have to ask the question, when 6 board members resign before you even mount the proxy contest, isn't that like a tacit recognition that something's broken here and maybe he's not the right leader?
I like this footnote, too. Southwest Airlines also accused Elliott of trying to disrupt its investor day.
Aren't they an investor? They're 10% investor.
And I think that's the point. Yeah, I think they probably were trying to disrupt. I mean, what are we doing here? Unlike Southwest Airlines CEO Bob Jordan, JetBlue CEO Joanna Garrity is actually making nice with its activist investor Carl Icahn. So Icahn got involved in February. He's already installed 2 of his executives on the board. Here's what Joanna said. This is how a CEO plays nice with its activist investor. Quote, "We've had really constructive discussions. I've been seeing what's happening at Southwest. I don't wish it on anybody because it's hard. It can be distracting at times. But at the end of the day, we are all focused on trying to drive a better business. We're focused on return to profitability, and we all are aligned to that regard." That's what you say.
Yeah, but it is a little shot across the bow at Elliott.
Focus on better business, I suppose.
It's like, I see what's happening over there, and that sucks.
Except the fact that we've been talking about the board at Southwest Airlines for many years now, and we would agree with Elliott. It was time.
Yes, it does.
It was time.
It does suck.
Yeah. And finally, we talked about this company last week, Masimo. Masimo founder Joe Kiani has decided to resign as CEO just days after shareholders voted to remove him from the company's board. The medical device maker has named Michelle Brennan as interim CEO. So remember, last week, shareholders elected both director candidates proposed by activist investor Paulton Capital while rejecting both directors nominated by the company. So you see, this stuff works. This alternative democracy, this voting, this stuff actually works.
Well, the craziest part about this story is this is the second go-around for Paulton. They mounted an activist campaign last year and got board members who Kiani then decided to freeze out. They would not give them information. They kept them in the dark as much as they possibly could. So this is the second round of activism in order to get them. Is this a glass cliff also? Is this
interim CEO, it's hard to say.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
Moving over to our vote results table, there's not a lot of votes coming in, but let's highlight a few meetings. The winner of the week is Take-Two Interactive Software Director Paul Vera. Paul is loved by 99.8% of shareholders. That's always nice to see. At Smith & Wesson, 30% of shareholders are aligned with the nuns at Mercy Investment Services, as they voted yes to a shareholder proposal calling for a human rights impact assessment. That surprises me. It's a high number for a company like Smith & Wesson. The power of the nuns.
Yeah, the nuns are good at this.
Vote results are in at 2 of the big vote companies covered here at the Proxy Countdown over the past 2 weeks, Darden Restaurants and FedEx. And the results are boring. That's my assessment. Shareholders supported management in just about every way possible. Sorry, Matt. I know you had a lot of good recommendations, but shareholders are really pro-management at those 2 companies.
I do love spending hours upon hours doing research for this show and for clients, only to find out that investors en masse just vote with management anyway.
And finally, there's a good one here at ConAgra Brands, an impressive rejection of Say on Pay, where 55% of shareholders said a big fat no. However, despite a decided anger against terrible pay policies, shareholders had nothing bad to say about members of the compensation committee, where they all averaged about 6 or 7% against. I can never understand this, especially in light of the story of what really happened. Okay, so you would think that they would be voting out these compensation committee members based on this that I'm about to tell you. So in 2023, just last year at the meeting, 31% of shareholders said no to Say on Pay. And the committee figured out it's because of 2 things. Because of, 1, additional value grants given to named executive officers, which essentially doubled their equity grants for no reason. They just doubled their equity grants out of nowhere.
Do they call it retention, like one-time retention bonuses?
Well, here's where the retention comes in. And on top of that, for the CEO, he also got a one-time retention bonus, equity granted at $10 million given to CEO Sean Connolly. So the committee's official response to these, because they talked to shareholders and they determined that the reason why 31% said no was because of these grants. And their official response in this year's proxy, first to the additional value grants, was that, quote, "We would like to assure our shareholders that the Human Resources Committee," that's the pay committee, "does not intend to repeat the additional value approach going forward."
Isn't that a mea culpa? Didn't they just say we screwed it up?
And then in response to the one-time equity grant to the CEO, their response was, "The company is committing to not provide any additional special grants to Mr. Connolly during his CEO tenure." So all they did was promise that we're not going to do it again, but we're not going to rescind what we already did despite your anger, but we're not going to do it again.
Think about that.
So I applaud shareholders at ConAgra because they were pretty savvy. They actually read their proxy statements and they determined, no, we're not falling for this. We're just saying we're voting the whole thing no this year. It's a big no.
Except that the people who wrote that down on the proxy are the people who set the pay, and you accepted all of them. That doesn't make any sense.
Including the fact that the board chair, ConAgra board chair Richard Lenny, also on that committee. So yeah, they had a real opportunity here to voice their dissent against people, but they shareholders are strange. They're strange beasts. That's
like your children promising, pinky swearing that they will never eat the chocolate at midnight again, and then you just not bothering to like move the chocolate. Like, vote your children out. You just do it.
That's a good takeaway. Let's get over to the big vote for the week. It's a big classic American Midwestern company, the Procter & Gamble company. A few thoughts before I hand it over to Matt. First of all, this is a classic. I call this this is like your classic American company. It's like I don't even know what you call it. We got to come up with a name with this. It's like a company that should be doing better than it is for shareholders. According to our data, the company's hitting overall 433. That's their performance. That's their number, which is below average, not so good. Their earnings they're doing very well. They're actually doing very well. 749, right? But their TSR, total shareholder return, is actually 469, so it's underwater. And I always wonder if it's because of their controversies number, which at this company is 162. So what I'm wondering out loud is this one of those classic American companies that shoots itself constantly in the foot by just looking like the bad guy? I don't know. They look villainous. There's a lot of controversies.
So they don't have to like look like the bad guy. They kind of a little bit are the bad guy.
Okay, so
in some ways,
I'm wondering out loud, does that deflate the share price? The only other thing I have to add here is that is what? I don't even know. I mean, this is just a classic American. There's no individuals have a significant stake. Vanguard has 10% share ownership. BlackRock has 7%. It's just one of these Midwestern monoliths. Yeah, go ahead.
I think of them as, this is American beta, right? Like, this is basically this is
pre-Silicon Valley America.
Yeah, this is. In fact, when I dug into Procter & Gamble, the history of Procter & Gamble, I did not know this, but did you know that the term soap opera came from the fact that companies like Procter & Gamble sponsored the actual original television shows, and they called them soap operas.
And that's probably about the time when they fired their innovation and.
I mean, let's be honest about what this company is, what these companies are in general. But Procter & Gamble being one of the largest, if not the largest, they're basically direct-to-consumer chemical supply chains. They do two things. They get a bunch of chemicals and materials and put them in bottles, and then they advertise to you. That's what they do. They tell you that their chemicals are better than somebody else's chemicals. There's not much else to it, which means their primary risks end up being, where are you getting those chemicals? How are you dealing with them? And what are you saying about them? Are you saying that this is great for the earth and it's not? Or and we see those risks manifest over and over and over again. So at a company like Procter and Gamble, you have pulp, wood pulp as a ongoing issue because of deforestation in order to get wood pulp so you can, wipe yourself with the with fresh virgin boreal forest, and palm oil so that you can clear cut jungles, grow palm, and make the oil, and then lather it on your face, right? So you're nice and clean.
It does make me wonder about the skill set, according to our data, for these directors. I pulled the top 7 skills represented from the non-executive directors, which essentially I think is the whole board except for the CEO. And listening to describe how you describe the company, 7% of influence is represented by medicine and dentistry, 6% biology. But then you see things like fine arts, administrative. I don't even see marketing there. It's not the type of skill sets I would expect from a Procter and Gamble.
Well, that's where my analysis landed. And here's what I did actually is I pulled. They have a list. They give a list of the most commonly used chemicals in the products that they have. It includes a form of formaldehyde, DMDM, hydantoin, formic acid, which is used in animal feed, and naturally occurring venom in ants. There's a cytotoxin that's listed, linked to health concerns. They're using a series of chemicals in here. So what you would expect from the directors is that you effectively have people who are great at supply chain, great at advertising because they do those things, and great at chemicals,
Not really
understanding chemistry, because that's where the risk comes from.
There might be one person who's qualified for that.
So when you look at the knowledge map of this company, the number one knowledge source of influence is economics. It's finance,
which is normal. We see that.
Which is normal.
Yeah, and it's I think it's 12%, which is basically 1 or 2 directors. I mean that makes sense. I mean, across all S&P 500 boards, we see that general number for economics and accounting.
9, accounting for about 70% of total influence on this board. No sales and marketing.
Yeah, that's
no
surprising.
Supply chain. No chemistry.
Yeah,
not a single person.
It's odd. I mean, yeah, it's odd. You see a lot of when you glance at the director list, you see a lot of experience that you wouldn't expect, McDonald's and Macy's, and it's just, I don't know. It's not what I was hoping for.
I mean, I get it. Look, everyone on this board is in the classic American beta Midwest mafia style company. These are all on paper hugely accomplished people, superstars in their field,
sure,
or superstars in a perceived area of company weakness for Procter and Gamble. You have a government person, you've got a manufacturing person, you've got a cybersecurity person, you've got Clorox getting cybersecurity breaches that shut them down. Procter and Gamble has you'd assume that same risk. You've got public affairs. You've got a plastic waste person. You've got an actual NGO presence from the World Wildlife Federation, and somebody who works on the CEO sits on the board of the plastic, Reduced Plastic Alliance Council or something like that.
You even have the former chief strategy officer at Boeing.
Yes, which I'm not sure that's you're chalking that one up on the good column.
No.
But which of these directors is best suited for the manufacture of methochloroside I mean,
I don't know.
There's so little power given to people with actual production backgrounds. There's basically zero engineering, technology, chemical backgrounds at all. And this is a company that can pull from any talent pool it wants, which gets me to...
Yeah, that's true.
The biggest the biggest flag I think that I see at these companies, and we talk about this all the time, but Procter & Gamble is absolutely one of the worst. There are 202 discrete connections in our data between directors at this company over the last 15, 20 years. They're a massive connector company. In fact, the highway in and out of Procter & Gamble includes Delta Airlines, where there are 14 overlaps in the last 20 years. Mondelez, 12 overlaps. We have Delta to Verizon. We have a Delta to Verizon to Procter & Gamble loop that's happened 10 different times. 10 times. That means there are 10 directors that have that same exact loop. The same loop exists with IBM to Citi to Procter & Gamble. You're talking about like a very small amount of American companies that are recycling directors in the same loop back to a company like Procter and Gamble.
Well, one other concern I have too is you mentioning this group of directors is that they have as far as actual corporate governance is concerned, their committee membership is quite bloated. There are 7 members each on the nomination committee, the compensation committee, and the technology committee. 7, which makes me wonder, like, how does anything get done? You have 7 highly interconnected directors who all come from these big powerhouse companies. I just don't know, how do these committees, which are meant to represent subsets of the board which tackle important issues and these important, I just don't know how anything gets done. I mean, most companies you see 3 or 4 committee members on these.
4
committees.
is big. 4 is a lot.
So it's strange.
It's not that it's strange. I think that it's strategic, right? Like if you want the chairs of the committees to have more power, you effectively increase the size of the committees, because that means the chair calls the meeting, the chair has the information, and all you really are doing in most of those meetings is collecting votes, because you don't want to be the 1 out of 7 who keeps raising your hand and saying, hey, can we talk about this again? I don't like that, when everybody else is ready for a Mai Tai, right? And to that end, on this board right now, 11 of the 14 members have clear and obvious board or professional overlaps. That's excluding like country club connections. I didn't get into their geographies, like where they actually physically lived, but the majority of the board is already connected. And the most connected person on the board, Terry Lundgren, he just got an exemption for being too old, past the retirement age, but they said there was so much
72.
disruption.
Yeah.
So much disruption on the other committees that they wanted to keep his committee chairhood going for a year. This is what they said about him.
So
you know what committee he chairs?
Yeah, he chairs the compensation committee.
The compensation committee.
Where there are 6 other members.
Like how much maybe the disruption would be minimized if you had 3 less people per committee.
I've been at this job for a long time, Matt. That sounds just like a lie. That just sounds like they're not ready to fire him. They don't.
There are 14 directors on this board, and he is connected to the 14 directors in 15 different ways. He's actually connected to them multiple ways.
Let me add to that too, because I looked at several past proxy statements looking at pay. Nothing really changes. The only thing that changes for pay policy is that they keep magically increasing figures for no reason. But that's it. It's not like he could hand this over today to my dog, and I think that the 6 other committee members could handle those pay policies.
I will say that even a company like I know the activists at Elliott are at Southwest. You've got activism everywhere. We had Nelson Peltz was at Disney last year, right? Even a 4-year stint of Nelson Peltz on the Procter and Gamble board as an activist could not help the insular nature of this board. The new CEO and at least 2 or 3 of the directors that came in after Peltz were already connected with other board members. In fact, Nelson Peltz got himself more connected to these board members, and there was no real change to Procter & Gamble in that period. So what you end up having is a pretty insular, self-serving board of directors with decades, and I do mean decades, of connective tissue that lack knowledge of basic core risks facing this company, including what the chemicals are that they use and the sales tactics that they use to sell those chemicals, right? So here's my recommendation.
Yeah, already too. I love it.
Effectively, what you want to do is you need to weed out American beta boards. There are a lot of these boards, and it's time to break them up.
We seem to cover a lot of these, yep.
You cannot have a situation in which 4 or 5 company-to-company loops make up the majority of the board over a 2-decade period. That means you are not extended your talent pool. You have not gone wide and you've not gone deep. All you've done is gone to other companies and just recycled board members through yours, right? Like you are just a feeder system. This isn't, American baseball where you've got you're just trading minor leaguers up to the major leagues and sending and back and rotating and whatever. There is a lot of talent out there that you could put on this board. So I recommend.
Well, before we get to recommendations, to your point, they also pay their directors quite well, and they actually could lure talent to Procter & Gamble quite easily. And looking at these directors at their bios, I think they'll be okay if they get let go.
They'll make,
You're not going to offend them. You're not going to lose a friendship at the country club. I think they'll be all right.
They'll be fine. They're
Yeah,
not
a lot
going,
of former CEOs, a lot of Christine McCarthy, former CFO of the Walt Disney Company. They'll be okay. So use that money that you pay them, and maybe to Matt's point, lure some talent.
I mean, we did an entire board draft on this show for Darden Restaurants. We basically said, what happens if you start from scratch with a company like Darden Restaurants? Well, what happens if you thought about the Procter & Gamble board and said, there's nobody on the board? Who would I put on this board? Because when that's your starting point and then you look through, the people look impressive. But you would also say, well, there's actually gaps here. There's gaps of what's on the board versus what I would want
Skills
on the board.
Gaps, yeah.
And I think gap number one is you need to vote against Terry Lundgren. There is literally zero need to keep him after 11 years, and he's connected 15 different ways to 14 directors. You don't need that anymore.
How about the fact that he's over the age of your stated policy, right? Your retirement age policy. I think easy enough, right? Stick to your policies. A lot of the times when they sort of like make an exception for the age, it's usually for like founders or like somebody who's been on the board for 30 years. I don't understand this one at all. They also have a term policy, right? Which is more than most S&P 500 companies in America. They have it's not just age, but they have an actual term. Is it a decade? Do you know that? Because he's already over a
He's
decade.
11 years. He's over a decade, and he's over the age. And I can't imagine, no offense, Terry Lundgren, I can't imagine you're irreplaceable on the Procter & Gamble board.
Well, to your point, there's another director who she's also over 70, has been on the board for over 15 years. Patricia
Wirtz. She is my second vote against. Patricia Wirtz is my second vote against.
I only pointed out because you have the stated policy. So just, how about but
it's also
policies?
It's really simple. She is significantly connected to this board also, and if you're going to kind of like root and stem this board out of like horse trading,
well, that doesn't surprise me. Yeah, when you look at her
next year, she's over the retirement age. Just do it 1 year early and find somebody else.
Doesn't surprise me when you look at her bio. Here are some of the names in her bio. Former CEO and chair, Archer Daniels Midland. Former EVP at Chevron. She was on the board of 3M. I mean, doesn't surprise me that she's highly connected.
We also have to ask questions like, and we talk about this all the time. We know that board director behavior is viral. We know that because academics have studied it. And they show when you put people in a room, when they've had an experience, they share that experience. And if there was no accountability for that experience, they weren't held responsible for that experience, they will make that behavior go viral. As in, if there's something gray about restating a financial, it falls on that gray zone, and you say, no, don't restate. And then nothing happens. Nothing bad happens. Your tendency will be to go to the next team that you're on and say, I was in the same situation. We didn't restate. There was no negative implication to that. That's what the academic research has found. It also applies to things like product safety, culture. Those things are repeatable. And the culture you have on this board, you mentioned 3M, you mentioned Boeing. These Midwest American mafia boards, these sort of American beta boards who have been trading with each other are uniculture. And at this point, we're paying for a uniculture that has cost shareholders tremendous amounts at Boeing, at 3M. These companies are paying. Yeah, and you're seeing weird like cowardice from boards like Deere, who are flip-flopping on diversity in their workforce, right? Like an emphasis on maximizing their talent pool. They don't want to say anything about it anymore.
What you're referencing is the controversies performance number that I mentioned at the top.
Exactly.
Right. So only two directors, only three directors even have a performance over 229. Most of them are like at a 100, less than 100. So that might be another easy way to target who to vote against at this company, is just root out some of the directors with low controversy numbers.
So it's against Terry Lundgren, against Patricia Wirtz, and I think there is a third item here, which is an engagement item. You need to break the chain of highly connected lead independent board members and to
we see a lot.
those
You know,
boards.
I'm glad you brought that up, especially in the Midwest. I've noticed in the Midwest region, we see a lot of that. I off the top of my head, I'm thinking of companies like McDonald's and
Exactly.
Caterpillar. You see a lot of the lead director is like everyone's best friend, basically.
And they're usually the longest tenured person on the board next to the CEO. They've
been together for a long time.
Procter and Gamble, like they haven't been together as long. But it really is a fallacy that there is a lead independent director. It's basically a game at this point. So I think the engagement here is if you kill the CEO chair combo at boards like these,
All boards,
it
but
invites
this
too much
one
power.
especially.
Or vote in or vote in a new lead independent director. Try someone who's actually independent. Like on your board, you have Brett Biggs, who's an ex-Walmart executive. He's less connected to the rest of the board, and Walmart actually represents 14% of Procter & Gamble's revenue in 2024.
I would guess, right? Everything they sell probably is at Walmart.
That's a real number.
Yeah.
It's like it all comes. It's like they're basically selling stuff to Walmart, which there's no more independent voice than the guy who represents the voice of the customers, right? So on your board, you have better options than like what you're using, which is Joe Jimenez is the lead independent director. So I think the three things here are against Lundgren, against Wirtz, and engage to either break up that CEO chair combo or get some actual independence.
Listen, the looking at the figures from last year, the director with the second highest votes against was actually, in fact, the CEO and chair, John Miller, right?
Yeah.
So, this is a classic board that very well should emulate a European company in the sense that why do you even need this guy on your board in the first place? I know that's
sacrilegious.
Yes, in this country to even suggest that. You're suggesting, that breaking up his role as CEO and chair, which I absolutely agree with, but he got 10% votes against at the last meeting, which again does not fire him as CEO. But I think those shareholders are onto something because I don't even know why you need this guy on the board in the first place.
So those are my recommendations.
All right. Moving on to, do you have any input on Say on Pay? I just want to, before you give your recommendation on Say on Pay, I just have to say one thing that always gets my goat. So I opened just to look in the last 2 or 3 years, right? This is what compensation committees do. And this is, again, another reason why you don't want your friends and former CEOs on compensation committees. At least, okay, the executives want that, but the shareholders shouldn't want that. So in 2022, they gave the CEO a long-term incentive award of $11.2 million, right? And then the next year, 2023, they upped that to $14.5 million, and then now this year that's up to $16 million. And again, there's no reason for this. America has not changed that much in 2 years that he needs an additional $4.8 million. And they give no explanation for this. I just wanted to point this out. This is some of the subtlety I think that shareholders lose because proxies, they don't give you that they don't backdate and tell you what they've been doing. You have to open up the proxy yourself to see how these compensation committees full of CEOs, how they just keep making this situation worse and worse every year.
And to that end, actually, you can tell that there's a game involved. So they report the CEO pay ratio, right? In this case, it's 329 to 1.
They have to report that, yeah.
The median employee salary at Procter & Gamble is $69,000, about $70,000, right? But Mueller's summary comp was $23 million in this proxy. But when you look just further down, the pay for versus performance chart, they actually show you his realized pay, how much money he actually took home from those long-term incentive awards. In fact, Mueller takes his bonus in cash instead of equity. So he gets a cash bonus every single year. Plus he's getting equity grants. Plus he's got long-term incentives. His actual take-home pay in the same year was $38 million. That is a $15 million difference. And that is one of the smaller years. There was a year where he doubled from $17 million to $34 million.
Which essentially means on the first day of January after the winter break, by probably by noon, he probably made the same amount of money than the median worker is going to make in a whole year.
But I actually have this question about why do we look at CEO pay ratio as his summary comp over the median and not his take-home comp over the median? The difference here is he goes from 329 to 1 to 543 to 1 in terms, and the S&P 500, the average is about 250. And even if you looked at the take-home, the average is in the 300 range, which means this is a CEO who's getting paid significantly more, who's effectively using the board to save the job of the comp committee chair because he's past retirement age and he's been there for too many years, but they're keeping him around and they're making exceptions. No wonder why you're making an exception. This is great.
Again, from a shareholder's perspective, again, if you look at our performance numbers, this is a guy who hits 865 in earnings, but only 382 in total shareholder return.
I'm inclined usually to vote no on like pay just as a general rule, but barring that, in this case, I actually think we need to rename Say on Pay Committee, because what the real problem here is the people on this committee keep inflating. It doesn't matter what the performance is. They keep inflating the pay of the CEO, to your point, on a year-on-year basis, even relative to the median employee. So I think in this case, you're abstaining from pay and you're voting out Lundgren. You don't you vote no on pay, abstain from pay. I don't even care what you do with the pay.
Just don't say yes.
Just don't say yes to Lundgren. Is really
Lundgren is the committee chair, right? Terry Lundgren.
Committee chair. That's right.
And let me point out that Terry Lundgren is a former CEO at Macy's, so it's in his self-interest to make sure that these numbers go up year after year. Finally, one shareholder proposal on the board from our friends at Arjuna Capital. Are they our friends? They should be. A shareholder proposal regarding racial and gender pay gaps. These are always no-brainers for me, but where do you weigh on this one?
So I read through this proposal, and actually they already have disclosure around racial and gender pay gaps, but Arjuna is asking them for a slightly different number. They're looking for an unadjusted number or a different kind of adjustment. If you are Procter & Gamble, why did you waste like $100,000 on a lawyer to write up the reason why you don't want to do this? This is like 7 seconds for Gus in the accounting department on an Excel spreadsheet. This isn't an Excel spreadsheet proposal. This is literally just report the number slightly differently that you already have. In fact, the fact that you're fighting it makes me think you weren't serious about the numbers in the first place. Well, they're not asking you for something new. They're asking it for what you have in a way that they can make better contextual comparisons. That's it.
Look, your logic is impeccable, but pulling back, this is a precedence issue, right? You management can never say yes to any shareholder proposal, right? Because these boards are full of former and current CEOs. They're just not in the game of saying yes to any of this, right? Isn't that the game?
No, my feeling is that it should have never gotten to a shareholder proposal. Like they could have been like on the phone with Arjuna saying like, hey,
good point. Yeah.
What if I'm going to send you a spreadsheet and I'm going to make it equal cell B7 instead of cell B6, right?
Clearly that number is something they're not proud of.
I don't know what the problem is, but it actually looks more suspicious that you would take this all the way to the proxy and have to vote no, rather than this should be one of those ones that never even makes it onto the proxy because you sent them a slightly different spreadsheet that you had.
You could even be clever about it. You could say, okay, Arjuna, we'll show you the number. You're not allowed to write it down, but we'll give you 10 seconds to look at the number. All right, that's it.
I am voting for this proposal all day long.
I vote for anything Arjuna Capital puts up as a yes for me. That's the proxy countdown for the week of September 23rd, 2024. We're a few days late on this show. Join us this week, I don't know, when we jump back into the alternative democracy pool forever on the lookout for shareholder sharks, floating band-aids, and wayward directors.